I mean, I know the main character is Rutger Hauer, that you would probably know from some American movies. But I knew him from a television series that I had done a couple of years before, where he was playing a kind of a Dutch Ivanhoe or Robin Hood or whatever. In the beginning I didn't believe that he could do this at all, but my producer, let's say, insisted that I should do an audition with him, so we did, and then I found out, of course, that he would be perfect, in my opinion, perfect for the part. So, and Monique van der Ven, the Olga, she was at that time first year or second year of the theater school in Holland. So she was a beginning actress at that time. We picked her out of the school, she never went back. You know, she became the most famous actress in Holland, in fact. And she's still working all the time. So that's a little bit the background story. We shot it mostly in Amsterdam, and in the little island is a little bit above Amsterdam in the north, called Texel. The locations were, everything is of course real, it's all real locations, there's no studio or whatever it was. We shot it really with a small camera. You probably don't know that anymore, it's a very small camera, it's called Ariflex. Ariflex still exists, but makes no like this. But at that time it was a very small camera with a sound, so you could not really register the dialogue. You had to redo all the dialogue. It's all dubbed. It's like a Fellini film. Everything and all the dialogue is done afterwards. But it's really precisely what they said. But you had to redo it because the camera made this sound. It's very little camera. There was no blimp or whatever. So you had to redo everything when you had edited the movie. Then you had to redo the whole soundtrack again. And I had at that time. First time I worked with a really wonderful composer, also that Rogier van Otterlo, who also did my music for Soldier of Orange, that might be more well known here. He gave, let's say, the leader of the orchestra, in fact, is Tielemans, who was very famous in Europe as a jazz and other stuff. He just died, in fact. A lot of dead people there, but it's a long time ago, you know. This is 73, and we're talking that the movie was released, and so we're talking about 40 years nearly, more. So it was my second film. I did a comedy before called Business is Business, but this was the first time that I did a movie that I wanted to make. Business was a proposal from some producers. Can you do that? Do you want to do that? And I said, okay, you have to start somewhere after television, go to cinemas, I'll do that. Let's say that comedy is about two prostitutes, in fact. But then basically, I said on condition that we can go, after, if it's successful, that we can do Turkish Delight.
I'm curious, not knowing the novel, which I think a lot of people, Americans, are not familiar with the young Walker's
It's
book.
translated in English, in fact.
But I'm curious what you and Gerard Soutman brought to the film, because looking at it just from the perspective of somebody who knows your work, it seems very you. There's a lot of you.
In some way, it's probably more romantic than I've ever been afterwards. I don't think Basic Instinct is, for example, too romantic.
No, but just in terms of the
Night of the Showgirls, that basically is following up. It will be later in the story.
Not romantic, no. But the candor of the
I mean, you have to realize that this was 1973, and that at that time, beginning of the 70s, really in Holland, what is called the Dutch sexual revolution. I mean, it was abortion was legalized, and the anti-conception conception pill was just invented and was used. It gave an enormous amount of freedom to women to do what they wanted without being caring about having a baby. So, in fact, it was for the first time in Holland that people could really see sexuality not so much as a way to, let's say, to reproduce the species, but as a way of call it joy, entertainment, love, or whatever, but that you would be free to have that possibility without being worried that you had to basically that you had to risk a baby. So I think there was an enormous amount of freedom and sexual freedom, very open-minded that society. Having affairs was more the norm than being, let's say, monogamous. And you feel that freedom that's not only in a sexual way, but in general the way the actors who work and especially in the first part of the movie, of course, it slowly descends into tragedy, of course, but even in its tragedy, it's full of hope in a way that even Rutger Hauer, the main character, it will continue his life, you know. Even the wig that he basically gave to her is put in the garbage bin, isn't it? And he will continue to live, and there will be another life and another day for him. So it's not, although it's tragedy, you feel that the main character, the protagonist, will survive. So I think that what Gerard Soterman did, the scriptwriter, was structure the novel and putting all kinds of pieces that were separated by 20, 30 pages, put them together and invent real scenes so you could see really, yeah, that it would be, let's say, a narrative. In the novel is not written as a narrative because you flashback and forward and backward, and it's more an impression of things that happen than a structure. So I think Gerard brought that all into the screenplay.
The chronology of the film, with with the long flashback.
That was really from the book again. I mean, like we did that with Al. We discussed that the movie I just did, the French movie. I mean, we copied really. Yes, we were thinking about doing another structure. It starts, let's say, at a certain moment, and then you flash back, and then you, at age 70, 67% of the narrative, you come back to the beginning. So it was a kind of a strange, let's say we start here, this is the now we flash back to the past, 2 years ago, as it says, then you go the full curve of that period, and you come up here again. And then you have the last part of the movie is she gets sick and she dies. So that was the way it was structured in the book already. The book really starts with him basically getting out of this kind of blues and depression that went because she leaves him, so she has left him, and goes hunting girls. In fact, that's what he's doing, and then it flashbacks to the past to explain why his wild reaction of going from one girl to the other, of how that has to do with the love he had for her.
Something you talked about in last night, actually, when you were introducing RoboCop, was how, especially in your Dutch films, there was this very strong connection with reality, with physical reality, and you talk about Dutch realist painting. And I'm wondering if that was something that was especially on your mind with this.
Not so especially because the writer of the book, Jan Wolkers, was was really the most modern writer of that time, and he basically based all this whole story. I mean, you might think that this is not an invention, isn't it? This is real. This is what happened really. Only one thing is different. That girl that we are talking about, the real Olga, didn't die. He used another girl that he had an affair with, who died, and overlapped them. So he used two women basically to construct Olga. And I always have felt perhaps making Olga die might be the revenge of the writer of for the woman that left him. Because he left the real Olga left him. And it's interesting that we didn't know. I mean, it was really presented at that time, and the film was made 3-4 years after the book was published. Everybody had the understanding, and was clearly suggested by Jan Wolkers himself, that this was real. He was talking about about his second wife, in fact. And everybody believed that. When we started to shoot the movie, the second or the third day, there was a woman coming forward. She lived in the north of Holland, saying, "I'm Olga, and I'm really alive," you know. And then we found out, of course, that he had used two women to construct the novel. Yeah. So
it is, as you point out, very much a film of its time, this sort of sexual liberation, sexual revolution, and it's a very sexually frank film, and I'm wondering if you have you had at the time, and if you have developed at the time, is a philosophy to filming sex, which is something that you've done.
Well, the sexuality was a part of the novel, clearly.
Sure, but I mean, it's something that you've engaged with in certain...
Yeah, but basically I was not the only one, basically. That had really to do with what I called the sexual revolution, that everybody was interested in sex without anything. I mean, sex for sex sake. As a pleasure. Sexual intercourse can be pleasurable. You don't have to make babies all the time, you know. I mean, see, of course, in our Darwinian perspective, of course, sex is only there to make babies, isn't it? Falling in love is only to make babies. So, I mean, I hope you understand that. But so we're all condemned to do that. You know, that's built in our DNA to basically to make babies. But it was a discovery to do for Holland in general, which is very Calvinistic, and everything is put in by God in a certain order, whatever. That was all broken by. Mostly by this writer, basically, that basically presented sex as something that can be consumed without, yes, with love, but certainly not without the idea. In fact, she's against babies from the very beginning. The first time they have sex, she says, don't make me a baby in it. She is basically horrified by the idea of having babies. So I thought it was an interesting point of view.
But it's different when it's in a novel and when you're filming.
Well, no, why?
Well, filming sex versus writing about sex.
I don't see it.
I don't think it's different.
Well, I mean, of course you have to, actors and actors have to take their clothes off, yeah. Yeah, that's sometimes, not with these two people, but that is sometimes a problem, yeah, sure. I mean, you know that basically will be all over the world, and so you might be hesitant. But at that time, nobody cared about that, you know. I mean, Monique van der Ven would do interviews half naked. When she was shooting a scene, then the journalist come to the set and basically, and she didn't even put her bra on again. She just did the interview, let's say, half naked. I mean, that was the kind of atmosphere, perhaps very difficult to understand it, perhaps in the United States, but that was the atmosphere at that time. I mean, that which probably was there for 5-10 years, and then now basically we are all basically. Holland is much more conventional. People marry again, and you have a fiancé, and everything is very much, let's say, conservative and call it old-fashioned when you want. That's perhaps a good description now. But at that time it was really different, you know. I mean, it was really an explosion of sexuality for the people that were my age.
You talked a little bit about Rutger Hauer and Monique van der Ven and how you knew her from Flores, and she was a student. Can you tell a little bit more about the process of casting them? I think these are really two amazing performances.
Well, I mean, as I said, basically, I didn't believe in Rutger Hauer as this character, but when my producer, in a nice way, but let's say, pushed me to do an audition with him, after, say, half an hour, it was clear that he was the person, you know, so I made a terrible mistake, and I've made many in my life, you know, but sometimes I'm corrected because you have good people around you that warn you, but you sometimes go really your own way, you think you're right, and you're wrong. So, I mean, as to Monique van der Ven, we had already given the part in some way promised to, at the time, very famous Dutch actress that had been in other movies and was, let's say, from a promotion point of view, PR point of view, celebrity point of view, would have been was the right choice. And basically Monique van der Ven came in for one of these small parts in the very beginning of the movie, the 3-4 girls that basically that he sleeps with and then goes to the next one, whatever. She would be one of these 4 or 5 girls. And basically, but when we were doing auditions for that, she was like, this is really interesting. And I remember that basically my cameraman was Jan de Bond. Jan de Bond became later a director. He did Speed, for example. And so we were I remember that we were in an apartment where we were doing the audition. We went to the balcony and we said, well, this is a very interesting girl, basically. I mean, and then we said, well, perhaps we should just although we have already chosen, but not officially, there's no contract, there's still a problem with the financing, let's say her salary of the famous girl. But suppose that she could do this part. And so secretly we did a rehearsal with her for the main part. And then in the evening we all came together, the writer of Jan Wolkers, the writer of the book, and the screenplay writer, and me, and the producer, and a couple of other people, and we looked at these let's say, videotapes that we had made of Monique van der Ven, and we were all looking at each other and said, this would be really, really different than anybody expects. And this might be more interesting, because the other one we know already, but we don't know Monique van der Ven. She was 19. So that evening, I said to Rob, but we promised it already to, I won't name her, but to the other actors. And he said, yeah, but the contract is not signed. So he was a really good producer, you know. And next day, basically, we changed around and we took Monique van der Ven in the main part. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's how it happened. A bit dirty, isn't it? I think. But I mean, but for the good of the movie, ultimately, you know, I think our choice was excellent, in fact. And at that time, and I never regretted it, you know. But you feel a bit guilty. Yeah.
And Jan de Bont ended up marrying her, right?
And Jan de Bont, basically, who had been so impressed by her during the audition, during the movie, fell in love with her and married her. But ultimately, then she came to the United States, and then ultimately she divorced.
Just one last question.
So she's very lucky, very happy now with another actor living in Holland, doing one television or movie after the other, and her life has been in Holland has been wonderful, you know. So, I mean, for everybody it worked out, but well, perhaps not for Jan. But then Jan found somebody else, and became very happy, you know. So divorce can be, let's say, better than what you have. I mean, they think about that. You know? But I'm already married nearly 50 years, so I'm out of the... For me, it's a different way. Yeah.
I'll just ask one more before we take a couple of audience questions. How was this film received? Can you talk about the reception? I know this is often cited as like the best Dutch film of the century, you know, the most popular Dutch film, and was there any controversy because you're
no, of course the book was accepted, the novel, and I think people were, let's say, really perhaps a bit shocked, but they were really very impressed, and people were crying and whatever, you know. So I think no, there was no controversy really, and people accepted the movie as it was really, and I mean it worked. I mean, if you realize in the country of at that time probably 14-15 million people in Holland in '73, 3 million people went to the cinema. That's 20% of the population went to see the movie. So it is the most successful Dutch movie ever made. Yeah, but more than anything I did after that. You know, 3 million people in a so small country of 50 million is a lot. I mean, if you would have that here, you would be double Star Wars. You know, so. I didn't have that here, but I mean, no, it won the award Best Dutch Movie in 2000 or something, the best 20th century movie. Yeah, sure. I mean, that was then 27 years later. Yeah. So no, it was like one of these things where everything worked. It was a movie where there was no problems in the during the shooting. There was no problem in post-production. We got everything we wanted. We got talented people. By coincidence sometimes, but it's one of these movies where you say, well, everything worked out, and the result was beyond anything I've ever dreamed about. You know, I mean, still I was very impressed in '86 when I saw basically people lining up for Robocop. I remember that I was sitting basically in Los Angeles with my cameraman at that time. Jan de Bont was still DP, and Monique van der Ven, who we had married at that time. We were sitting in front of the theater in a restaurant open to the, and we're looking at all these people that were lining up for Robocop. I think that might have been more impressive than anything else in my life. Yeah. That moment.
since you brought up Star Wars, I want to ask you if that story is true about how you were. The story, as I've heard it, is that George Lucas recommended you to direct one of the sequels, and no, Steven Spielberg recommended you to direct one of the sequels, and then Georch Lucas, based on Turkish Delight.
Yeah, I heard that story from also recently died, Dan Ireland, who was at that time the director of the Seattle Film Festival, and he basically told that story that he heard that from Kathleen Kennedy, basically the producer of Spielberg, but that the story would be, if true, because I cannot guarantee that in any way, this is just could be gossip, is that Spielberg and Reade and Lucas basically considered me for the second part of Star Wars till they saw another movie I had done recently, Spatters. And when they saw that, basically the love was over. And I basically, it was interesting that happened, you know. I came to the United States with that movie, that were these big, how you call it, movies, how you say it, what is the, where you put the movie in, isn't it? Yeah, reels, the reels. Basically, we had this 5-6 reels of Spencer Wizards, and I immediately, basically, because I had, it was Spielberg who after Soul of Hornets called me at 3 o'clock in the night and say, why don't you come to the United States? They make big movies, do real movies. And so ultimately I went there and he introduced me to the studios and everything was really wonderful. Till then I thought, okay, I'll bring you my new movie. But that was a mistake. That was the end of the story, if it's true. It's a good story to tell, you know. I mean, I've never heard it confirmed by Spielberg, so I don't know if it's true.
We'll try to find out at some point. All right, let's take a couple of audience questions. Yes?
It's a comment. First of all, I want to thank you for bringing the movies here, because as a Dutch expat, I never got to see them in Holland, and now I'm very happy to see them here. And when the book of Wolkers came out in the Netherlands, I was in a girls' school in Amsterdam, and it was forbidden reading. The library wouldn't get it, and there was severe punishment if anybody was caught reading it. Of course, we all read it under the blankets.
But about 10 years later, it was obligatory, an obligatory book for your high school, for your, let's say, how you call that, your exam at the end, baccalaureate, in French. So, I mean, it changed. The movie changed it, in fact, and brought it to everybody, and suddenly it was classic, you know. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I just have a question. I'd like to know, were there any specific neighborhoods or areas in Amsterdam where you were filming? Where were these scenes shot?
Question about locations and Amsterdam locations specifically.
No, not really. I didn't. I used a couple of locations that are very well known, but mostly when they are on the bicycle. The two of them after marriage, and they go to the street. That was really in the center of Holland, of Amsterdam, where you have the big monument and the Palace of the Queen is there, and whatever, King now, in fact. But so that there's a couple of these things, but I tried not to be too touristic, because I felt that was distracting in this movie. So I did 1 or 2 shots that you could recognize, but for the rest I used streets that were more hidden.
Thank you.
In fact, the hospital is in Rotterdam, in fact. Right.
Yes.
Could you say a few words about the 2 wonderful actors who played her parents?
The parents. The father came from, was a recommendation by the writer of the book, Jan Wolkers, who told me, I see in this movie, I see one person very precisely, that's the father of Olga, and I would point you, like to point out, Wim van der Brink, his name is, to look at that actor and consider him for the part. That was really a suggestion of the writer, and basically I talked to him and we decided immediately to take him. As to the mother, Tony Huurdeman, both most of course are dead. She had been in another movie that was not successful really, but I